My son cut me out of his life for 20 years. He wouldn't speak to me and ignored all my attempts to contact him until I became rich. Suddenly, he invited me over for Christmas as if nothing had ever happened. But I had a plan. When I arrived at his house, I smiled and said, "I have a surprise for you." Their faces gleamed with greed, expecting my money. But when they saw what I had prepared, their faces went pale and their smiles vanished. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening from in the comments. The phone rang just as I was settling into my evening routine. The shrill sound cut through the December silence in my city home like a razor. I almost didn't answer. Telemarketers had a habit of calling right around dinner time, but something made me pick up the receiver. "Dad!" The voice hit me like a physical blow. 20 years of silence, and now this casual greeting as if we'd spoken yesterday. "Ethan." My voice came out steady, though my knuckles had gone white where I gripped the phone. "This is unexpected." "Yeah, well," I could hear that familiar nervous laugh, the one he used as a boy when he was caught in a lie. "Listen, I know it's been a while, but Christmas is coming up, and Susan and I were talking. We'd love for you to come for dinner, you know. Family time." Family time. The words were bitter in my mouth. I stared at the faded family photo on my kitchen table, the one of an 8-year-old Ethan, gap-toothed and grinning before everything fell apart. "A while?" I couldn't help the sharp edge in my voice. "Ethan, you haven't returned my calls in 2 decades. Do you remember the birthday cards I sent? The graduation invitation I mailed? They all came back, unopened. Dad, come on, I've been busy. You know how it is. Building a career, raising a family. There's never enough time." Never enough time. I stood up, pacing the small kitchen. Outside, Christmas lights blinked mockingly in the neighbors' windows. But suddenly, there's time now, right after the news about my lottery win hit the papers. A beat of silence, too long. "I don't know what you're talking about." "You don't?" I kept my voice deliberately calm. $15 million, front page of the local paper last month. What a coincidence. This sudden invitation. "Dad, that's not, I'm happy for you, but that's not why I'm calling. We just thought it would be nice to reconnect. You're getting older, and I'm getting older." I almost laughed. "I've been getting older for 20 years, Ethan. Where were you when I had my heart surgery? When I spent Christmas alone in this empty house, year after year?" His voice shifted, defensive now. "Look, I know things haven't been perfect between us, but that's in the past. We're family. That's got to count for something." Family. The word hung between us like a curse. I thought of all the times I'd sat by this very phone, willing it to ring, all the unanswered messages, the returned letters, the birthdays spent in silence. "You're right," I said finally. "Family does count for something. I'll be there." "Really? That's great, Dad. Christmas Eve around 6 p.m. I'll text you the address." "Do that." I paused, letting the silence stretch. "And Ethan, I have a surprise for you." "A surprise?" His voice brightened, and I could practically hear the dollar signs in his tone. "What kind of surprise?" "You'll see." I hung up before he could reply. I set the phone down carefully. My hands were trembling slightly. The kitchen felt different now, charged with possibility. Outside, the snow had begun to fall, blanketing the quiet city streets in white. I stood there for a long moment, staring into space, my mind traveling back. To the last time I had seen my son's face. It had been so long ago, but some wounds never truly heal. They just lie dormant, buried under years of quiet dignity and resignation, until the right moment comes to reveal themselves. I walked to the window, watching the snow fall, and remembered how it all began. The snow reminded me of that December 20th years ago, when everything I had built came crashing down. I had been sitting in this same kitchen, though the house felt different then, warmer, filled with the promise of a family. Susan had been packing her bags, which were strewn across our bedroom floor like open wounds. "You're pathetic, Robert." Her voice echoed in my memory, sharp and cruel. 45 years old. And what do you have to show for it? A dead-end job at the company, a mortgage we can barely afford, and dreams that will never come true. I remembered standing in the doorway, watching her fold clothes with mechanical precision. I thought we were happy. Happy? She had laughed, a sound like shattering glass. "When was the last time you surprised me with anything? When was the last time you took me somewhere nice? Richard treats me like a queen." Richard, her new boyfriend, the one with the luxury car and the corner office, the one who had been calling our house for months before I finally understood what was happening. "What about Ethan?" I had asked, clutching at straws. "He needs stability. He needs his father. He needs a winner for a father." She had slammed the suitcase shut. "All you've ever been is a disappointment." The divorce had been quick and brutal. Susan's lawyer had been expensive. Mine was overworked and underpaid. She had walked away with the house, the car, and our son's loyalty. I had moved into this small rental in the city, starting over at 45 with nothing but my bookkeeping job and the bitter taste of betrayal. Ethan was 18 then, old enough to choose sides, and he chose hers without hesitation. "Mom's right," he had said during one of our last conversations, his voice cold and filled with teenage certainty. "You're just making excuses. Maybe if you had tried harder, if you had been more successful, none of this would have happened." I tried to explain, to make him understand, but he had already made up his mind. The new stepfather had money, influence, connections. What did I have? A small apartment and a broken heart. 20 years of silence followed. 20 years of unopened birthday cards, of phone calls that went straight to voicemail, of Christmas mornings spent alone in this quiet house. I had learned to live with the emptiness, to find meaning in the small things, my work, my books, the occasional kindness of neighbors, but I had never stopped hoping. I never stopped believing that one day my son would remember the man who had taught him how to ride a bike, who had stayed up all night when he had pneumonia, who had loved him unconditionally, even when love wasn't enough. The lottery win had changed everything. $15 million, tax-free, from a ticket I'd bought on a whim at the corner store. The story had hit the local news, then the state papers. Within a week, my phone had started ringing again. Old friends I hadn't heard from in years, distant relatives I had forgotten existed. And then today, the call I had been both waiting for and dreading in equal measure. I walked over to my desk and pulled out the folder I had been assembling for months. Bank statements, investment records, legal documents, everything I would need for Christmas Eve, everything I would need to show my son exactly what kind of man his father had become. The snow was still falling outside, blanketing the city in pristine white. Soon, very soon, I would have my chance to give Ethan and Susan the surprise they had been waiting for. But something told me it wouldn't be quite what they expected. I smiled to myself, closing the folder. 20 years was a long time to wait for justice, but I had learned that some things were worth the wait. The isolation had been my teacher. Though I didn't realize it at the time, after the divorce, when the loneliness settled into my bones like a winter chill, I needed something to fill the endless hours. That's when I discovered my gift for numbers. Not just the bookkeeping kind, but the kind that could build empires from dust. It started with a foreclosure notice I'd seen in the local paper back in 2008, a small duplex on the south side. Nothing special, but the price caught my eye. While everyone else was running scared from the housing market, I saw an opportunity. I drove past the property on my lunch break, noting the good bones beneath the peeling paint and the overgrown yard. That night, I spread newspaper clippings across my kitchen table, their yellowed edges curling under the lamplight. Mortgage rates, property values, market predictions. I devoured them all like a starving man. The old wooden chair creaked under my weight as I leaned forward, scribbling risk calculations on the backs of utility bills. "Are you sure about this, Mr. Vance?" the banker had asked, peering at me over his glasses, skeptical. "Real estate is a dangerous game right now." "I'm sure." I signed the papers with a steady hand, even though my heart was pounding. It was every cent I had saved since the divorce, plus a small loan against my modest retirement account. The duplex became my nightly project. I'd drive there after work, tools rattling in my trunk, and spend hours scraping paint, fixing leaks, replacing rotten floorboards. The physical labor felt good, purposeful. For the first time in years, I was creating something instead of just surviving. 6 months later, I had tenants. Good people. A young couple just starting out, grateful for clean walls and working pipes. The rent covered my mortgage with a small profit left over. I reinvested immediately, buying another property, then another. The Great Recession was my golden opportunity. While others were losing fortunes, I quietly built mine, one careful purchase at a time. I learned to read neighborhoods like books, to spot potential where others only saw problems. The midnight calculations became routine. Spreadsheets glowed on my computer screen, tracking income and expenses with methodical precision. By 2015, I owned 12 properties across the city. By 2020, 23. I lived in the same small rental. I drove the same reliable car. I wore the same modest clothes. But under the surface, I was accumulating power. The kind that came from smart decisions, made in patient solitude. The lottery prize had been luck, sure, but it landed on a foundation I had built through discipline and determination. $15 million on top of what I had already earned through sweat and strategy. I was worth more than Ethan could possibly imagine, more than Susan would ever believe possible. I glanced at the clock. Almost midnight. The snow had stopped, leaving the city draped in a pristine silence. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new chances to prove that the quiet man they had dismissed as a failure had become something else entirely. Did Ethan know the full extent of what I had accomplished? Did he understand that his father wasn't just lucky, but smart? I doubted it. In his mind, I was still the broken man who had lost everything 20 years ago, but that man was gone, replaced by someone who had learned to turn loneliness into strength, failure into triumph. The house settled around me with familiar sounds. I had work to do, plans to finalize. Christmas Eve was coming and I intended to be ready. Morning came with fresh snow blanketing the windows, and I was nursing a coffee at my kitchen table when the phone rang again. The sound made me pause, mug halfway to my lips. 2 calls in 2 days, after 2 decades of silence. "Robert?" Susan's voice hit me like a cold wind. Still that same breathy tone she used when she wanted something, though age had hardened the edges. "I hope you don't mind me calling. I got your number from Ethan." I set my coffee down carefully. "Susan, how thoughtful of you to reach out. Listen, I know things ended badly between us, but we have a son together. That has to count for something, right? Ethan's in trouble, Robert. Serious trouble. He needs help. And I thought, well, with your recent good fortune..." I could hear shuffling in the background, whispers. Then Ethan's voice, faint but clear. "Ask for more. Tell him it's urgent." "What kind of trouble?" I kept my voice neutral, though my grip tightened on the receiver. "His business. You know how the startup world is, so volatile. He's got investors breathing down his neck, and if he doesn't come up with the money soon..." She let the sentence hang. "I hate to ask, but could you help out? For old time's sake." More whispers. "Say it's for the grandkids' future." "It's for the grandkids' future," Susan continued, her voice taking on that pleading quality I remembered from our marriage. You don't want them to suffer because of some business trouble, do you? I watched the steam rise from my coffee mug, thinking of all the times I had fallen for this routine, the manufactured crises, the emotional manipulation, the way she had always known exactly which buttons to push. How much? I asked. Well, $200, $1,000 would cover the trouble, but if you could stretch to $300, another whisper, maybe $400, just to be safe. I almost laughed. $400, $1,000, asked for as casually as borrowing a cup of sugar from a neighbor. I see. Robert, I know you're angry about the past, but this is bigger than our issues. This is about family, about doing the right thing. The right thing. I repeated the words slowly. Tell me, Susan, what was right about 20 years of silence? What was right about returning unopened birthday cards? What was right about teaching our son to treat his father like a stranger? Her voice hardened. That's ancient history. We're talking about now, about your son's future. I won't be giving you a penny. The words came out cleaner than I expected. No anger, no bitterness, just fact. What? She sounded genuinely shocked. Robert, you can't be serious. You won millions of dollars. What's a few $100,000 to help your own son? Not a penny, I repeated. Not now, not ever. But you love him. You're his father. How can you abandon him when he needs you most? I thought of all the times I had needed them, all the times I had reached out and been ignored. I learned from the best. You're making a mistake. You'll regret this. I don't think I will. The line went dead. She had hung up on me just like that. I set the phone down and watched the snow continue to fall outside my window. The silence felt different now, not empty, but filled with possibility. I had passed the test. 20 years ago, I would have written the check, desperate to buy back their affection. But the man I had become understood something the old Robert never did. Respect couldn't be bought, and love that came with a price tag wasn't love at all. I finished my coffee and began to plan my next move. Christmas Eve was still days away, but I had a feeling my son and his mother weren't finished with their little scheme. That was fine. I had waited 20 years for this moment. I could wait a little longer to see exactly how far they would go. The phone remained silent on the table, and I found myself almost hoping it would ring again, because every call just made my Christmas surprise a little sweeter, a little more justified. They thought they were dealing with the same broken man who had lost everything decades ago. They had no idea who they were really up against. Sleep eluded me that night, and by dawn I knew what I had to do. The early morning light cast long shadows across my kitchen floor as I sat with my coffee, staring at the phone. One more test, one final confirmation of what I already suspected. I picked up the receiver and dialed Ethan's number, my fingers steady despite the weight of what I was about to do. Dad? He sounded surprised, perhaps even pleased. I wasn't expecting to hear from you so soon. I've been thinking about what your mother said yesterday, about your troubles. Oh, that. His voice shifted, growing more cautious. She probably made it sound worse than it is. You know how she worries. I leaned back in my chair, watching the winter wind rattle my windows. Actually, Ethan, I called because I have some troubles of my own. Financial troubles. I let the words hang in the air, noting the way his breathing changed. I'm afraid I made some terrible decisions with my lottery winnings. Got swept up in cryptocurrency trading, you know, Bitcoin, Ethereum, all those digital coins everyone was talking about. Oh no. But his tone wasn't compassionate. It was calculating. How bad is it? Pretty bad. I lost most of it in a market crash last week. Volatile investments, they warned me. But I thought I knew better. I paused, letting him absorb this lie. I might have enough to cover Christmas dinner, but not much else. Silence stretched between us, broken only by the hum of the phone line. I could almost hear his thoughts shifting, recalibrating. Well, he said finally, his voice colder than a northern winter. That's really unfortunate, Dad. I guess these things happen. They do. I waited, giving him a chance to offer comfort, support, anything that might resemble filial concern. So, about Christmas, he cleared his throat. Maybe it would be best if you didn't come this year. I mean, with everything you're dealing with, you probably need to focus on getting your finances in order. There it was, the mask dropping completely. I see. I kept my voice neutral, though inside I felt a cold satisfaction. So the invitation is cancelled. It's just, you understand, right? Susan's been planning this big meal, and we were sort of counting on... Well, anyway, it's probably for the best. Less stress for everyone. Less stress? I nodded to myself. Of course. Wouldn't want to be a burden. Dad, don't be like that. It's just practical. When you get back on your feet, we'll definitely get together. When I get back on my feet, I smiled grimly. Right. Listen, I've got to run. Conference call in 5 minutes, but we'll talk soon, okay? The line went dead before I could reply. I set the phone down and stared out at the snow-covered city streets. 20 years of silence. And the moment they thought I was broke again, it was back to total silence. I knew it would happen, but having it confirmed so brutally still stung. Not because I was surprised, but because it crystallized everything I had suspected about their motives. Love with conditions wasn't love at all. It was a business transaction. I walked to the window and pressed my palm against the cold glass. Outside, my neighbors were already starting their day, warming up cars, shoveling driveways, normal people living normal lives, probably taking for granted the simple fact that their families loved them for who they were, not what they had. The test was complete. The jury had returned its verdict. Now it was time to plan the sentencing. With that clarity, I spent the afternoon researching the lives my son and ex-wife had built while ignoring my own. If they wanted to play games, I needed to understand the rules. I started with my old network of business contacts in the city, connections I'd made during my real estate ventures. A few phone calls revealed interesting information about Ethan's startup, or rather, its spectacular failure. Vance Tech Solutions. Jim Patterson from the Chamber of Commerce laughed bitterly. That kid burned through investor money like it was confetti, promised revolutionary software, delivered nothing but excuses and expensive lunches. What happened to the investors? They're not happy. Word is, he owes close to $2 million between the venture capital firm and private backers. Some of them are getting lawyers involved. I took notes on a legal pad, my bookkeeper's mind automatically organizing the information. $2 million in debt. That explained the desperation. The internet provided the rest of the puzzle. Ethan's professional profile showed a string of failed companies, each one lasting just long enough to attract funding before collapsing. His social media painted a picture of a lavish lifestyle, expensive restaurants, luxury cars, designer clothes, all financed on other people's money. But it was Susan's social media profile that truly disgusted me. Her profile showed a woman playing the victim with masterful precision. Pictures of her looking wan and tired, coupled with posts about her brave battle with cancer.
Day 47 of chemo. One post from last month read, "The treatments are exhausting, but your donations keep me fighting. Every dollar helps with medical bills and experimental treatments my insurance won't cover." I scrolled through months of similar posts, each more manipulative than the last. Thousands of dollars in donations from well-meaning strangers, all based on a lie.
Because I knew Susan wasn't sick. She was just greedy. A quick search of the city's hospital records through a contact who worked in administration confirmed my suspicions. No cancer treatments, no chemotherapy, not even a suspicious mole removal. I cross-referenced her posts with Ethan's spending patterns on social media. The timing was too perfect to be a coincidence. Every major surge in donations coincided with Ethan posting about a new business opportunity or a costly purchase. They were working together, a mother-son team bleeding money from strangers while ignoring the man who had actually earned his wealth through honest work. I compiled everything into a folder, the same methodical approach I had used for my real estate investments. Bank records, social media screenshots, testimony from scammed investors, a paper trail that painted a clear picture of systematic fraud and emotional manipulation. The irony wasn't lost on me. They dismissed me as a failure, a man not worth their time or attention. But that same man had built a fortune through patience and strategy, while they had built nothing but debt and deceit. I closed my laptop as evening fell over the city, the glow of the screens fading into the darkness. Tomorrow would bring new opportunities, new pieces of the puzzle. But tonight, I allowed myself a moment of satisfaction. I wasn't the victim in this story anymore. I was becoming the author. The phone rang again. Probably another desperate attempt to get money from their rich father. I let it ring, listening to the sound echo through my quiet home. Let them wonder, let them worry. Christmas was still days away, and I had work to do. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the city in white. Clean, pure, ready for a fresh start. Dawn brought focus, and I reached for the phone before my morning coffee had finished brewing. The notes from yesterday's research lay spread across my kitchen table like a battle plan. It was time to see just how far my son's greed would take him. Ethan answered on the second ring. "Dad, this is unexpected. Twice in 2 days." "I have good news," I said, settling into my chair. "Remember those crypto investments I told you about, the ones that wiped me out?" "Yeah." His voice carried a note of weariness, as if he suspected where this was going. "Well, I managed to recover most of it. Day trading, you know. Bought the dip, and it surged back up. Turned out better than I expected." The silence stretched for exactly 3 seconds. I counted them. "That's fantastic, Dad. I'm so relieved. I was worried about you." The lie rolled off his tongue so easily. Not a hint of shame or awkwardness for how quickly he had dismissed me when he thought I was broke. "So I was thinking," I continued, "maybe Christmas is back on, if the invitation still stands." Of course it does. Susan will be thrilled. She's been looking forward to seeing you." Another lie. I could hear the calculations clicking behind his words like an old cash register. "Actually, Dad, speaking of Christmas," his voice shifted, becoming more intimate, more son-like. "I know it's awkward to bring this up, but since you mentioned your financial recovery, I was wondering if you might consider helping me out with something." I smiled grimly. "Oh? It's this business opportunity, time-sensitive, you know, the kind of deal that could set me up for life. But I need to move fast. 300 Julzurn would cover my initial stake. 300 Julzurn. Not a loan request. A demand wrapped in the language of opportunity. That's a significant amount, Ethan. I know. But Dad, this isn't just about me. It's about securing the family's future, your grandchildren's future. And honestly, after everything that's happened between us, I thought this could be a way to, start fresh." The manipulation was breathtaking in its audacity. Family, grandchildren, fresh starts, all the buttons he thought would work on the man I used to be. "Tell me more about this opportunity," I said, injecting just enough interest to keep him talking. "It's in the tech sector, AI development. Revolutionary stuff, really. The early investors are projecting 500% returns within 18 months. The same pitch he had likely used on his previous victims. I wondered if he'd even bothered to change the numbers. 500%. That sounds too good to be true. I know it sounds crazy, but Dad, this is how these groundbreaking technologies work. Remember when Bitcoin was nothing? The people who got in early made fortunes. And I let the silence hang between us, as if genuinely considering it. I truly marveled at how completely he had revealed himself. No mention of paying me back, no acknowledgement of the 20 years of silence, just his hand held out, palm up, waiting. "I'll have to think about it," I said finally. Of course. But Dad, time really is a factor here. The window closes after Christmas. So if you're going to do this, we'd need to move fast. The urgency was manufactured, of course. Create pressure, eliminate time for doubt. Classic con man tactics. I understand. Let me sleep on it. That's all I can ask. And Dad, thanks for even considering it. It means the world to me. I hung up and leaned back in my chair, watching the morning sunlight gleam on my notepad. He had taken the bait completely. No suspicion, no questions about how I had recovered my losses so quickly, just pure, unadulterated greed. I took my pen and wrote down a single word. Confirmed. 20 years of silence, and now he wanted $300,000 based on a 5-minute phone call. The audacity was almost admirable in its shamelessness. Almost. I looked at my watch. The workday was just beginning, and I had other calls to make, other pieces to put in place. Ethan thought he was playing me, but he had no idea the game was already well underway. With that bait set, I turned to the contacts I'd compiled during yesterday's research. The investors Ethan had scammed deserved to know where their money had gone and where the man who had taken it was hiding. I started with the venture capital firm first. The receptionist patched me through to a Mr. Davidson, who sounded tired even at 9 a.m. "You're calling about Ethan Vance?" His voice sharpened. "What's your connection to him?" "I'm someone who believes in accountability," I said carefully. "I understand he owes your firm a considerable amount of money." Considerable is an understatement. We're talking deliberate fraud, but he's vanished. No forwarding address, no contact info. Our lawyers are at a dead end. What if I told you I know exactly where he is? Davidson's chair squeaked as he leaned forward. "I'm listening." "He's in this city. Been hiding out here for months, living at his mother's place while he plans his next scheme." I provided the address, the phone number, and the social media evidence I had gathered. Davidson's excitement was palpable. "How do you know all this?" "Let's just say I have a personal interest in seeing justice served." After Davidson, I contacted the 3 private investors Ethan had named in his failed company's registration documents. Their reactions were remarkably similar. Initial skepticism, followed by barely contained rage as I provided proof of his whereabouts. "That little weasel," snarled Eleanor Martinez, who had lost $50 on his solar panel startup. "I knew he was hiding somewhere. My lawyer said we'd need a private investigator to track him down." "Consider the investigation complete," I said. "I'm also sending you evidence of his current lifestyle. Social media posts showing expensive purchases, restaurant visits, luxury goods, all while he claims to be bankrupt. By noon, I had contacted 7 investors. By 2 p.m., they were forming a class action lawsuit. By 3 p.m., they had a conference call scheduled with their legal teams. I sat back in my home office, surrounded by papers and screenshots, listening to my phone buzz with updates. Every call brought more satisfaction than the last. "Mr. Anonymous," Davidson said when he called back, "I don't know who you are, but you've given us exactly what we needed. We're filing emergency motions to freeze his accounts and seize any assets we can find. How quickly can you move?" "We're talking days, not weeks. Christmas could get very interesting for Mr. Vance." I saved Davidson's business card with the others, creating a neat pile of consequences. For 20 years, Ethan had lived without facing accountability for his actions. That was about to change. The phone rang again. This time, it was Eleanor Martinez. "Our lawyers are coordinating with the others. We're going to hit him from all sides simultaneously. No more hiding, no more games. I'm glad I could help. "One more thing," she said. "When we find him, and we will find him, I want to thank you properly. You've given us hope when we thought all was lost." I hung up and looked out over the city streets, where my son thought he was safe, where he thought he could continue his schemes without consequence. The snow had stopped falling, leaving the world crisp and clear. Perfect visibility for what was coming next. I opened my laptop and started typing an email to the local news station. If Ethan wanted to play games with other people's money, maybe it was time the whole city knew what kind of neighbor they had. With the alliances forming, I drove out the next afternoon to gather the final piece of evidence I needed. St. Elizabeth's Hospital was on the east side of town, its brick facade dusted with snow. I parked in the visitor's lot with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. The automatic doors hissed open, releasing that familiar antiseptic smell that always reminded me of my own heart surgery years ago, the one Ethan hadn't bothered to visit me for. I walked through the lobby, my footsteps echoing on the polished floors, past families clutching bouquets with worried expressions. I found Janet in the medical records office, a woman I knew from my bookkeeping days when I'd handled the books for her late husband's dental practice. She looked up from her computer in surprise. "Robert Vance, what brings you here on a day like this?" "Hello, Janet. I need a favor, and I know this is delicate territory." Her expression shifted to one of caution. "What kind of favor?" I pulled out a business card from Davidson's firm. "I'm helping with a fraud investigation. There's a woman claiming cancer treatments she never received, collecting donations under false pretenses. Lives are being affected." Janet studied the card, then looked back at me. "Robert, you know I can't just... Susan Vance, my ex-wife." The words tasted like acid. "She's been running a scam on social media, claiming chemotherapy treatments that never happened. Good people are sending money they can't afford because they think she's dying." Something shifted in Janet's eyes. She'd always been a woman who valued honesty over bureaucracy. "This stays between us," she said quietly. 20 minutes later, I was sitting in my car, reviewing the printouts, a clean bill of health going back 5 years. Routine checkups, dental cleanings, a minor sinus infection last spring. Not a single oncology appointment, no chemotherapy, no cancer diagnosis of any kind. The hospital's fluorescent lights cast stark shadows on the papers as I read every detail. Each page confirmed what I already knew. Susan's entire cancer story was fabricated. Every donation, every sympathetic message, every prayer sent her way was based on an elaborate lie. I tucked the records into my coat pocket, feeling their weight against my chest like a suit of armor. The drive home through the quiet city streets gave me time to process what I had discovered. The snow was falling steadily, blanketing the world in white, making everything look clean and new. For a moment, sitting at a red light, I wondered if I was crossing ethical lines. These were private medical records, obtained through personal connections rather than proper channels. But then I thought of the families sending $20 bills they couldn't afford, believing they were helping a dying woman fight for her life. The light turned green, and I drove on. Sometimes justice required getting your hands dirty. Back at home, I placed the records in my folder, alongside the investor information and the lawsuit confirmations. 3 separate angles of attack, all carefully orchestrated, all perfectly timed. Ethan and Susan had spent 20 years believing they were smarter than everyone around them. Tomorrow, I would put that theory to the test. I looked out my kitchen window, where Christmas lights twinkled in the neighbors' windows, and allowed myself a smile. The holiday season was about to get very interesting for the Vance family. The phone rang one more time that night. I let it go to voicemail, already knowing it would be either Ethan or Susan with another urgent request or manufactured crisis. But their time for making demands was running out. After tomorrow, they would be too busy dealing with the fallout to bother their poor, forgotten father. I poured myself a cup of coffee and settled in to review my plans one last time. Christmas morning was just a few hours away. Christmas dawned crisp and clear, and I prepared for what would be the most satisfying holiday gathering in 20 years. I dressed carefully, not too formal, not too casual, and drove across town to the address Ethan had texted me weeks ago. The house was in a newer development, all vinyl siding and identical landscaping, with Christmas lights strung unevenly across the porch. I could see shapes moving behind the windows, probably Susan fussing over last-minute preparations while Ethan counted imaginary profits from his fictional investment opportunity. I rang the doorbell, arranging my face into what I hoped looked like grandfatherly excitement. "Dad!" Ethan opened the door, arms spread wide, as if we'd had weekly dinners for years instead of radio silence. "You made it! Come in, come in!" Susan appeared behind him, thinner than I remembered, but with that same calculating look in her eyes. "Robert! Oh, it's so wonderful to see you. You look prosperous." I stepped into their warm living room, noting the expensive furniture that didn't quite match, the oversized television, the designer handbags carelessly slung over chairs, all bought with other people's money. "I am. Thank you for having me," I said, hanging my coat on their rack. "I brought something special for later, a surprise for you both." Their eyes lit up immediately. "A surprise?" Susan clasped her hands together. "How thoughtful." We sat down to dinner at a table that could have fed 12 people, laden with dishes that looked impressive, but tasted like they came from the prepared food section of the grocery store. Ethan carved the turkey with theatrical flourish, while Susan filled wine glasses and peppered me with questions about my recovery from the crypto losses. "So lucky you managed to bounce back," she said, not quite meeting my eyes. "These market fluctuations can be so unpredictable." "Indeed they can," I agreed, cutting my turkey into precise pieces. "But I've learned to be more careful about who I trust for financial advice." Ethan launched into a detailed explanation of his AI investment opportunity, complete with projected returns and time-sensitive urgency. I nodded along, asking questions that made me sound interested, while watching their faces grow more animated with each perceived sign of my willingness to invest. The knock on the door came just as Susan was serving dessert. Loud, authoritative, the kind of knock that meant business. Ethan frowned, setting down his fork. "I'm not expecting anyone." He walked to the front door, Susan and I trailing behind. Through the window, I could see a man in a dark overcoat holding an envelope. "Ethan Vance?" the man asked as the door opened. "Yes?" "You've been served." He handed over the envelope and turned to leave. Ethan stared down at the papers, his face draining of color as he read. This can't be right." "What is it, dear?" Susan peered over his shoulder. "It's a lawsuit, multiple lawsuits. The investors, they found me." His hands trembled as he flipped through the pages of legal documents. Emergency asset freeze, demands for restitution, allegations of criminal fraud. "How did they even know where I was?" His voice cracked slightly. I maintained my expression of a concerned grandfather while internally savoring every moment of their panic. "Oh, no," Susan said, reading over his shoulder. "Robert, this is a terrible time, right during Christmas dinner." "These things have a way of catching up to people," I observed mildly. Ethan was pacing now, running his hands through his hair. "I need to call my lawyer. No, I need to get out of here. They could freeze everything, the house, the accounts, everything." "How much do they want?" Susan asked. $2 million, plus damages, plus interest." He looked like he was going to be sick. Susan turned to me with that familiar expression I remembered from our marriage, the one that appeared whenever she needed something expensive. "Robert," she said carefully, "I know this is awkward, but Ethan's family, our son, and with your recent good fortune, perhaps you could help with the legal fees. just until this gets sorted out." She reached for her phone, probably to start calculating exactly how much she thought she could extract from me. I smiled at her, the same patient smile I had worn through 20 years of manipulation and contempt. "Actually, Susan, I think you're going to have bigger problems than legal fees. Very soon." She looked up from her phone, pausing mid-dial. "What do you mean?" "I know someone who specializes in fraud cases," she said, her voice taking on that determined tone I remembered from our marriage. "A friend from Facebook, brilliant lawyer, handles this kind of thing all the time." She pulled up her phone and navigated to Facebook, her fingers moving with business-like efficiency. I watched her face, knowing what was coming but curious to see how it would unfold. The first notification badge showed 97 messages. Her eyebrows raised slightly, but she wasn't concerned yet. Popular people got lots of messages, especially during the holidays. Then she started to scroll. "What the hell?" she whispered, her face going white as she read. The phone trembled in her hands. "Susan, what is it?" Ethan leaned over her shoulder, his lawsuit papers forgotten. They're saying I faked having cancer. Look at these comments. Fraud, scammer, disgusting. There are hundreds of them." I took a sip of my coffee and watched the show unfold. She scrolled faster, her breathing growing shallow. "There's a news article. City woman exposed for fake cancer scam." Who would do this? Ethan grabbed the phone, reading aloud. "Anonymous source provides medical records proving Susan Vance never received cancer treatment despite collecting thousands in donations for chemotherapy costs." "This can't be happening." Susan's voice broke. "Someone hacked my medical records. This is illegal." "Is it true?" Ethan asked, his voice deadly quiet. "Of course it's not true. I'm fighting cancer. You know I'm fighting cancer." But even as she said it, I could see the doubt creeping into Ethan's eyes. He was many things, but he wasn't stupid. The medical records were too detailed, too official-looking to be fabricated. "Oh my God, Mom! Oh my God, do you know what this means? They're going to investigate everything. My lawsuits, your donations, all of it." And Susan's phone buzzed with another notification, then another. The messages were flooding in now, from former donors demanding refunds, from reporters requesting interviews, from authorities asking questions. "Make it stop," she whispered, staring at the screen. "Make it stop." "I can't make it stop," Ethan snapped. "You did this. You brought this on us." "I didn't do anything. Someone set me up." They both turned to me simultaneously, as if suddenly remembering I was there. Their faces held a mixture of desperation and hope, the same expression I had seen countless times when they had needed something from me. "Robert," Susan said, her voice turning syrupy despite the panic. "You said you had a surprise for us. Please tell me you brought what we discussed. The money for Ethan's investment. We need it now more than ever." Ethan nodded eagerly. "Dad, I know this looks bad, but we can fix it. With your help. We can hire the best lawyers, the best PR firms. We can make all of this go away." I stood up slowly, setting my coffee cup down with deliberate care. Their eyes followed my every move, hungry and desperate. "Actually, I've already delivered your surprise." The words hung in the air like smoke. I walked over to the coat rack and put on my jacket, taking my time with each button. "What do you mean?" Susan's voice was sharp with rising panic. "I mean exactly what I said. I've already given you what you deserve." "But the money," Ethan started. "There is no money. Not for you." I walked to the door, their confused voices following me. "Robert, wait! You can't just leave. We need to talk about this." But I was already turning the handle, stepping out into the cold night. The door clicked shut behind me, cutting off their pleas and protests. I walked to my car without looking back, though I could see the warm glow of their living room window in my peripheral vision. Inside, they were probably still trying to process what had just happened, still believing they could manipulate their way out of the consequences. The engine started smoothly, and I pulled away from the curb. In my rearview mirror, I saw a figure appear in the window. Ethan probably, watching me disappear into the darkness. 20 years of silence, 20 years of contempt, 20 years of treating me like I didn't exist. Now they knew exactly how that felt. The days blurred into weeks, and the reports trickled in through the city's network of gossip and genuine concern. The story had legs, as they say in the news business, and it ran far and wide. Janet from the hospital called first. "Robert, I hope I did the right thing." The authorities contacted me about those records. Turns out someone had tipped them off anonymously about the fraud. "I'm sure you handled it appropriately," I said, stirring sugar into my morning coffee. The local news picked it up. Then the state papers. Something about it just caught people's attention. Maybe the audacity of faking cancer for money. Other updates came through casual encounters at the grocery store, small talk with neighbors, snippets of information that painted a picture of systematic collapse. Ethan's court battles had been swift and brutal. The investors, armed with evidence and fueled by righteous anger, had presented an airtight case. The judge had shown no mercy for someone who had stolen retirement funds and college savings to fund a lifestyle of lies. "He lost everything," reported Tom Harrison, whose law firm had handled some of the paperwork. "House, car, bank accounts, had to move back in with his mother, if you can believe it." But Susan's situation was arguably worse. The cancer fraud had touched a public nerve in ways Ethan's investor schemes never could. People could understand bad business deals, but faking a terminal illness crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Her Facebook page had become a wasteland of angry comments and demands for refunds. The local news had run a follow-up story on how her fake treatments had coincided with peddling miracle cures and unproven supplements, suggesting she had been profiting off desperate people's hope in multiple ways. "Fraud charges are likely," mentioned Carol from the library, where I'd started volunteering on Tuesday mornings. "The DA's office is taking it seriously." But the most satisfying update came from an unexpected source. The mail carrier, a young woman named Sarah who had been following the story, dropped by my house with a package and couldn't help but share what she'd seen. "Delivered a bunch of certified letters to that address yesterday," she said, referring to Ethan's house. "Legal documents by the looks of it." The woman who answered the door, his mother, I think, looked like she'd aged 10 years. I thanked her and went inside, feeling something I hadn't experienced in decades, complete peace. The spring that followed was a revelation. I discovered that freedom from resentment was like recovering from a long illness. Suddenly, the world had color again. I took my first real vacation in years, driving up through the mountains, staying in small towns where no one knew my story. In another state, I met a retired teacher named Margaret, who told me about her volunteer work with literacy programs. By the time I returned to the city, I had signed up to help adults learn to read. It felt good to be building something instead of just tearing things down. The community center where I volunteered was full of people who had faced real challenges, job loss, family trouble, health problems, and had chosen to move forward instead of back. Their resilience put my own struggles into perspective. "You seem different," observed Father Miller from the church, where I had started attending again, "lighter somehow." He was right. The weight I had carried for 20 years had been lifted, leaving room for things I had forgotten I enjoyed: books, long walks, conversations with people who valued honesty over profit. I still lived in the same modest house, still drove the same reliable car, but now these things felt like choices instead of limitations. I had enough money to live anywhere, do anything, but I'd discovered that satisfaction came from different sources than I expected. One afternoon in May, while planning a trip to visit the Grand Canyon, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Ethan's number. but I let it go to voicemail. Later, I listened to his message, a rambling apology mixed with subtle requests for financial help. I deleted it without a second thought. The next morning, I packed my suitcase and loaded my car with maps and guidebooks. The Grand Canyon could wait, though. First, I was going to drive through the neighboring state where I'd heard about a small town that needed help rebuilding after a tornado. It felt good to have somewhere to go, someone to help. It felt good to be needed for the right reasons. As I pulled out of my driveway, I glanced one last time at the house where I had spent so many years waiting for a phone call that never came. I understood now that I had been waiting for the wrong thing entirely. The road ahead was empty and full of possibility. I pressed the accelerator and drove toward whatever came next, leaving the past where it belonged, in the rear-view mirror, growing smaller with every mile. If you enjoyed this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts on this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click the box on the left. Thanks for watching.